Here today. It's great to have you here. I really appreciate each one of you taking time. This time of year, it's a hectic time of the year to be here. We appreciate it. We're delighted to have you. I know we have a number of law enforcement folks here with us today, and I just want to say thank you for what you mean to certainly Auburn University, to our faculty, our staff, and our students. We appreciate all of you and the great job that you do. Frank's going to come up and do the formal introduction, but I have to tell you that I read a little bit about our key speaker today. He went to school at New Mexico State, and I used to work there. So I made some phone calls back to find out about him, and it was interesting. 3 or 4 of the folks said that he's a real strategic thinker. I thought, well, that's good. Another one said he did a lot of strategic planning. I thought, well, that's interesting. But what all of them told me was he's a huge basketball fan. So I sort of put the dots together. Out of 365 days in which he would have been welcome on this campus, he chose to come on the Friday before we play Kentucky tomorrow. So Frank, come up here and do the correct job and introduce our speaker today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Gouge, and I'd be remiss if I didn't thank you for all you've done, your commitment to let us advance our national security mission. And to be absolutely honest, it's one of the primary reasons I came to Auburn, is the commitment, the practicality, the thinking with the brains and the hands, and the fact that everyone bleeds red, white, and blue. So I very much appreciate that. I will be very brief in introducing our speaker today, who is part of our Leaders on the Plain series, Deputy Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, David Bowdich. I might note the world's premier law enforcement agency. And David came to the Deputy Director role as an operator. So he started out as a sniper, so another reason not to get on his bad side. But also came through, initially started as local law enforcement. And I think there is not a single person who would say that he hasn't been a phenomenal deputy director right now. So it is the FBI, so I did my own investigating as well, just like you. Made some phone calls, and I spoke to one of his first bosses, Tom Harrington, and you can correct me if this is inaccurate. But he said, other than almost crashing the car when Tom met David in San Diego and told him, you're coming to D.C., he said David, along with Mike Steinbach, were the 2 best hires he had ever made. And that was when he was in the San Diego field office as an operator with scar tissue, doing the real job in the field. Then I spoke to a colleague who happens to be one of my closest friends, Mike Downing, who ran intelligence and counterterrorism for the Los Angeles Police Department. And Mike said, without a doubt, in his 35 years wearing a uniform, that David Bowdich was the single best partner he had ever worked with. The best ADIC, which was, he was the assistant director running LA. He ran the Joint Terrorism Task Force at LA. And Mike Downing doesn't mince his words, and he had nothing but effusive praise for David Bowdich. And then I asked a couple of people who worked for him. I'm not going to mention them by name, but to the person, they all said he's been the single best person they have worked with. And I think it's a testament to his commitment to the men and women of the FBI, the mission, and ultimately our country. So for me, it's a real privilege to be able to bring David Bowdich on campus. I've had the privilege of working with him quite a bit on cyber-related issues, and I said, I got to get him here. Our students and our faculty need to hear from David, and I'm so happy you were able to do this for us today, David. So please, the floor is yours.
Great, I appreciate it. Well, good morning, everyone. Now I got to earn all that. That was a nice intro. Thank you, Frank. And thank you, Dr. Gouge, and also General Burgess. We appreciate, I appreciate you all welcoming me to your campus. What I'm going to do this morning, first of all, I was fortunate to run over and say hello to your command staff over at the Auburn Police Department this morning, and also 2 of your officers who were shot, one of them, I believe, 5 times, and they stood right next to me, and I thought, wow, we're fortunate to have young men and women like that are willing to do what they do out there. And that department's been through a lot, but it was a pleasure to go and talk to them this morning. But what I'm going to do today, before Frank and I actually sit down, and I want to say some very nice things about Frank, which are well deserved. I serve on a committee with him up on the Hill that is the Cyber Solarium. And this is a well-run bipartisan committee that is productive, and we're getting things done in the cyber arena. Everything from how do we look at our cyber threats, how do we have defined cyber norms in the world, all the way down to the issue of encryption. So it spans everything in the middle. But Frank has been an incredible player. I met Frank when I was in Los Angeles on the counterterrorism side, and always knew he had a tremendous reputation, and worked with him a little bit out there, but have worked with him a lot over the past few months, and it's been a pleasure, and I think you're fortunate to have him. Now, I was told, your president did sniff me out a little bit. I did tell Frank I'd love to come down there. It's hard for me to go anywhere during the middle of the week because my schedule is downright oppressive. However, he asked me to come speak, and I said, I'd love to come on a Friday when you have a good basketball game. So he called me and said, we got one Saturday. I'll be there. I was told if I want to get out of this room alive, I have to say, go Tigers, so I'll say it. But anyway, I look forward to that. But listen, I want to talk to you a little bit about the FBI. First off, how we have changed, how the world has changed that has caused us to change. And then make no mistake, I'm using this as a shameless recruiting pitch. And so I hope I can pique the interest of a few of you today. And ultimately, in the FBI, what I try to impress upon our leaders is we have a responsibility, and Director Ray does, more importantly as well, is we have a responsibility to serve the customer. We have a service that we have to provide, but the public is the customer of our service. And we get in some difficult situations, and we oftentimes make very difficult and sometimes unpopular decisions, but it's important that we do them in the right way. And the public should always be able to question our work, but the public should never have to question our motives, and that's incredibly important for us as an organization. But I want to unpack the organization for you so you understand, for those who don't. It has really evolved since 9/11, and it used to be more of a law enforcement agency than anything. It still is to an extent, but we also have a firm foot in the intelligence community, and it is both a national security intelligence agency and a law enforcement agency. So the widgets that we make, if you will, are case investigations and intelligence. Everything else surrounds that supports those two missions. And we have really had to expand our knowledge, our understanding, our training, our personnel, and our linkage to throughout the U.S. intelligence community, as we are a full partner, and we do have folks from, whether it's a Native American reservation in New Mexico or whether they're sitting in Paris, and everything in between. And that's how this organization is spread out, where we've got folks throughout the world. We have over 80 offices throughout the world, but we've also got 56 field offices here in the U.S. You have too. You're a unique state in that regard. You have both Birmingham and you have Mobile field offices, and we have the leadership of those two offices in here today. But the organization is spread throughout the world, and that is a necessary thing in today's era, because particularly in the cyber area and in the counter-intel and even in the counterterrorism and criminal realms, there are no borders like there used to be, not nearly as much. And so we have to regularly work with our foreign counterparts. I talk to them weekly, talk to the CIA and the NSA on almost an every other day basis. We work with them very, very closely, and I will tell you, I'm very proud of those two organizations as well for what they have done to serve this country. And certainly, especially when you're in the field, but even in Washington, we have to work very closely with our state and local counterparts because the state and local officers are the backbone of law enforcement throughout this great country that we live in. So we've really had to expand. Let me walk you through quickly the FBI's priorities. First off, our number one priority is to protect the homeland from attack. So it's counterterrorism. So what does that mean? That's everything from, we had people in theater in Iraq, Afghanistan, and we have them, from Dhaka, Bangladesh, all the way into Southeast Asia and throughout Africa and the Middle East, serving sometimes side by side with military counterparts. Very different missions, and we try not to mix the two, but they're very complementary in many ways. And the DoD counterparts out there do some incredible things overseas, and we're able to ride on their spine a little bit and provide a different solution when there is a need for a different solution in the counterterrorism realm. One thing we have seen here in the U.S. is the concerns in the CT realm that have morphed over the years post 9/11. It would be very difficult, and I'm very measured when I say this, but it would be very difficult for a massive scale attack like we had in 9/11 to occur, given the way we have tied our intelligence apparatus together. I'm not saying it could not occur, it could, but we stay vigilant throughout the U.S. intel community to ensure that it never happens again, a 9/11 style attack. And I feel much more confident that that would be difficult to carry out because of all the logistics, the planning, the financial aspects to it, the communications that have to take place. But make no mistake, we never take our foot off the gas in the counterterrorism realm. And that's not just the FBI. That's everything from the state and local departments that we work with in the cities throughout this country, all the way to the international U.S. intelligence agency and international partners. When it comes to domestically, this is an area where we have had some attacks throughout this country since 9/11. I witnessed and was a part of investigating a couple of those. And I will tell you, they are devastating to a community because our communities want to be safe, and our people deserve that from us. And every time we do not prevent one, you feel a great sense of responsibility. Whether we knew about the person and had investigated them, or whether we knew nothing about this person, you still feel this weighty responsibility that what could we or should we have done to stop this? So there's a lot of pressure on folks to prevent and disrupt. And I will tell you, we have had hundreds of disruptions of terrorist plots throughout the country since 9/11. Some of them small scale, many of them small scale. But these are folks that either planned to go overseas and fight against U.S. and coalition forces, U.S. USPers, or these are folks that actually were planning something here in the U.S. Again, many smaller scale, but smaller scale leads to people's deaths, U.S. citizens' deaths. So it is a zero-sum game. There's a lot of pressure on these folks that are working that, but it is our number one priority, and I believe it will be for some time to come. Our number two priority is the counter-intel world. This is the spy versus spy world that we're in today. I will tell you, when I came into the FBI almost 25 years ago, this was an incredibly slow-moving world for those of us who wanted to go out and kick doors, and you were ready to go out and run and gun and do those things that you wanted to do. That's why I joined the FBI. I never wanted to work that at the time. I was young. As I matured, I learned how important that game, that counterintelligence is to the future of our country. And we have seen increased activity throughout the world, but certainly throughout this country. And so it is important that we attract young, sharp minds to come in and begin to work on these violations, because I do believe that the counterintelligence world, when you consider the efforts of China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and some of the minor ancillary players beyond those, but those are the big four, when you look at what they are taking from this country, stealing, I'm not talking about just taking, stealing, it is important that we work hand in hand with our other federal partners, our international partners, but more important than ever, that we work with our private sector partners. And I can expand on that later, but I will tell you, the private sector holds so many gems, if you will, that this country, that drive this country's economy, that maintain our national security secrets. It is so important that we work closely with the private sector, much more so than it ever has been. I'll tell you, when I was a real agent back in the day working cases, if your SAC asked you what was going on in some business or corporation, the light bulb went off. Your SAC, your special agent in charge, they were looking for a post-bureau job. That's what they were doing. Today, if I ask the SACs what they have in their AOR that's driving the economy, whether it's a clear defense contractor, whether it's a university research, or whether it's a corporate manufacturing or technology, they ought to know. And they need to be engaging consistently with those corporate leaders and with their security and intel shops, because there is so much that is held on the corporate and private sector side that we need to be able to discuss and understand what do you have that you're trying to protect, and then let us help you protect it. And that's not just an FBI mission. An FBI, we provide the threats. Here's the threat atmosphere, but here's what you need to think through to harden your resilience. There's a DHS agency called CISA. CISA will help them with the infrastructure protection. We help them when they are attacked, or before they're attacked, left of boom, so to speak, with here's the threats that are coming in from the nation-state actors. We also help them when they are attacked with attribution to that attack. Where did it come from? Is it a nation-state adversary? Or is it a ransomware attack from a criminal group, transnational criminal group, or what is it? We help them with attribution and the investigation of that attack. So it's really important that we establish those relationships. It's no different than you should not meet your police chief on the street when you've had a major event that you now have to work together. You have to meet that private sector partner before that major event occurs. So the SACs have a lot of pressure on them, not just in the law enforcement and the intelligence realm, but to work closely with the private sector today. As part of that, we've also expanded our academic outreach, which is very relevant here. What we see throughout the nation, and I can think of case after case where we have seen both traditional collectors, but more often non-traditional collectors. These are appendages of the PRC in China that are stealing sensitive research information, sensitive intellectual property, nation-state secrets, flat out stealing it. Think about it. If you're an adversary and the U.S. or any other Western nation begins to put money into research, and we do research really well in this country, but if you can save all that cost and all that time and steal it when the research is getting close to be done and when they're moving towards implementation, that's the time to get it. Or even after they've implemented, if you can reverse engineer it, you can save a lot of money and time for your country that is trying to overcome this country. I want to be clear, our issue is not with the Chinese people, it is with the Chinese government. And this is something that we are educating our educators, quite frankly. We have some unbelievably smart people in this country, and especially in some of our sensitive research in the technology world, and the world is watching, and they're waiting for us to put things out. But there are other nation-state adversaries that want to steal it and drive it out themselves. Everything from research to biomedical research to technology research. Silicon Valley can be a challenge for us at times. You have some fantastic work going on up there. But think about it. You can have two 24-year-old kids in their garage developing what could be the next greatest thing. And you try to talk to them about a nation-state adversary attack. They don't care. Now, they're smart, really smart, but they don't think about it in those terms sometimes. Some of them don't. So that's something that we have to deal with in the counter-intel world. Next is cyber crimes. Our cyber crimes span from ransomware attacks, as I mentioned, all the way into very sensitive, complex intrusions. And so that really spans the entire organization. We've had folks say you should get rid of the cyber division, so to speak, inside the FBI and just push it throughout the organization. And the answer is the day may come when we can do that. We're not mature enough for that yet, but maybe someday, but not for a while. That cyber division for us holds a lot of expertise. And they'll help with everything from your standard business email compromise cases to your romance scams. Those are easy compared to some of your very sensitive intrusions. But they need to push that knowledge out and work with the investigators that don't yet have that knowledge so that they can better investigate whatever the violation that they're working is. Fourth priority for us is public corruption. Public corruption in this country is no different than any country. Do we have it? Yes, we do. The difference is between us and many countries, when we find it, we'll dig it out. And it's a bipartisan issue, by the way. It's not one side. Both sides believe it's the other side. We see this often. I can tell you, look at the numbers, it's about the same. We don't even keep the numbers, but I kind of think through my head, well, which congressmen, senators, whatever. Regardless, it's a bipartisan issue. We don't have it nearly to the extent of many countries that they have it throughout the world. I've been to places throughout the world where you'll sit down with some of the agencies and they'll want to talk to you about terrorism, and you have to be very, very careful when you're talking to them because you quickly realize they're not talking about terrorism. They're trying to lure you in to use the power of your agency or theirs against a political adversary. That's a dangerous road to go down. Our folks constantly run into this overseas because the tools and the authorities that are held by an intelligence organization or a law enforcement organization are very powerful, and you have to constantly be mindful not to be misused. The day we get pulled to the right or to the left is the day we lose our effectiveness for the American people. And that is incredibly important that we always remember that, and we do try. The next one is civil rights. This state has a long history, and we have done a lot of work in this state on civil rights issues. This is not the only state that has it. We have historically done a lot of work in the civil rights program. It's a very important program. We see ups and downs throughout the country. I'll get asked periodically, is there an uptick in certain activities? And the answer is, there's definitely an uptick in reporting. It's sometimes difficult to determine, is there an uptick? So we try to be very careful about measuring, how we're measuring those things. But regardless, what matters is we will respond to civil rights violations, whether it's color of law violations or whether it's hate crimes. And those are things that we are very aggressive in charging. And then the next one, the priority for us, the sixth priority would be our transnational organized crime. This is everything from assisting the DEA on some of the money laundering side of the drug cartels that are very prevalent along the southwest border. They do a lot of work throughout cities in this country, as well as gangs, street gangs. And you say, why is the FBI working street gangs? Well, because many of these gangs, there's disorganized crime out there, don't get me wrong, but there's also many of these gangs that are very organized, and they are transnational. MS-13 is a big priority for the current administration, the president, as well as the Attorney General. It's a big priority for us, and it has been for years. And that is a problem because you actually have tens of thousands of MS-13 and 18th Street gang members down in El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and so we work very closely with those governments. MS-13 actually started in this country. It started in Los Angeles because you had Central American immigrants that were being preyed upon by the Hispanic and Mexican gangs. And so they started their thing. The problem is it morphed, it grew, and it became a transnational organization. That's just one of many street gang cases that we will work. And what we do is we often apply the racketeering statute and or federal drug statutes to those cases, those investigations, and they're actually quite effective. And then we move towards complex white-collar crime. This is an ever-present violation that we have to work everything from financial institution fraud to healthcare fraud. I will tell you, one of our group of investigators that I really admire are our healthcare fraud investigators. And the reason being, it's not sexy. The media used to call, when I was running Los Angeles, they'd call our press shop and say, hey, we want some good stories. Do you have some good cases? We can talk about violent crimes cases, terrorism cases all day long. And I'd say, hey, throw them a good healthcare fraud case, because it matters. And every time we all write our checks, I still write checks, or every time you pay however you pay, to our provider, medical provider, We should think about that, because the impact that healthcare fraud has on this country and our bills, ultimately the consumer, it is massive. And you've had some really good cases out of your Birmingham division here in the last few years. And those folks churn through document after document after document, and they don't get a lot of attention. And it's hard work, and it is arduous, and it's tedious, but let me tell you, it's important. It's impactful to all of us. Everybody has to pay a medical provider at some point. And then finally, violent crimes is our 8th priority. So you say, why the 8th priority? Number one, because you've got over 18,000 police departments out there that handle the large brunt of violent crimes work. You've also got other federal agencies that do it. What we try to apply is the enterprise theory when possible, meaning you look at the organization like an enterprise. You can pick low-hanging fruit off a tree all day long, but until you cut that tree down, you don't stop that organization. So that's something we really focus on in the violent crime world. Everything from kidnapping groups to crimes against children, which is an unbelievably prevalent problem throughout this country and every other country in the world, seemingly, to extortions, and you get some pretty interesting extortions, to bank robberies, because the banks are federally insured. So that's the FBI's priority. So I want to talk to you quickly before I go too long, because I don't want to take much time away from Frank's chat here. I want to talk to you about what we're looking for in people. Because again, this is a shameless recruiting opportunity for the FBI, and I am not above it. Auburn University has a tremendous reputation. And I don't know if you know that, and I'm not pandering here, but it does have a very good reputation throughout the country. And you have a lot of skill sets here. You have a lot of forward thinkers in your administration and your leadership. And we are expanding our footprint right here in Alabama over in Huntsville. In addition to the 2 field offices and the respective satellite smaller offices, we're putting a pretty significant footprint of the FBI in Huntsville. We also have and always will have our version of the Pentagon, which is in Washington, D.C., which is FBI headquarters. And then we've got all these offices that I talked to you about earlier. But what that generates is a need for people. We're going through right now as an organization essentially a 25-year bump. So between 1992 and 1994, there was a hiring freeze in the federal government. So when we're working through that, nobody's thinking about 25 years later, 20 to 25 years later, the impact that has. We're going through that right now. So on one side, you have a lot of people who have matured in the organization and they're approaching or at retirement age. On the other side, you have a very healthy, robust economy. And our folks are getting good jobs on the outside, and they have financial pressures like everyone else. So it's hard. As much as they don't want to leave, they leave. But that's generating opportunities. I personally, in the organization, I love this organization. I believe in it 110%. And if I could stay, I would stay forever. Not forever, because you'd lose your effectiveness. Maybe that's why we do have a 57-year cap for our agents. Agents have to retire at 57. And so that's by federal law under the retirement system. But it is actually, it's like a train coming down the pike, and you see it coming, you know eventually it's going to hit you. So I'll have to go at some point. I realize I have more past than future, but there's a lot of future talent here. There's a lot of future talent throughout this country that we are trying to recruit, attract, and retain. And we are doing so in a very methodical manner. One thing that we have really driven into our workforce is back in the day when I was a case agent, you'd say, I'm not recruited, that's a recruiter's job. It's not my job. Well, I was looking at that wrong. That was a lack of maturity on my part. It's everybody's job in the organization to recruit. And we're telling them that. Whether you're at work, church, school, kids' events, whatever it is, when you meet someone that really impresses you, you need to talk to them and try to encourage them. And then once we get those folks into the organization, what we're focused on internally is don't just look up. Don't let your ambition just send you up those stairs. Look back and try to pull someone along, because we've got to develop, identify, develop, encourage future leaders to lead this organization. Because I think all of us, regardless of what you do, you want to look back at whatever organization you came from, and you want to say, I was a part of that. And you know what? It's even better now than it was when I was there. And I hope that will come for us. And that's the type of mentality that we're trying to drive into our workforce to make sure that this organization remains healthy for decades to come. But with that, we're also looking for certain skill sets. Languages are very, very important for the FBI because of all the international work we do. Technical skills, really, really important. Experiences, really, really important. We don't hire 23-year-old kids to be FBI agents. We can hire them. Every now and then you'll find one because they have a particular skill set, but it's rare. We like to see some sort of professional experience. When you go through Quantico, the FBI Academy, as an agent, and/or certainly in the agent classes, it's about the average age is 30, because many of these folks have done something before they came in. When I came in, there was 4 staples. There was former cops, there were former lawyers, former CPAs, and former military. And then there's a little scattering, a mishmash of, a teacher here, a business person there, a nurse here, whatever. But that was pretty standard. Today, we've had to expand that to more computer scientists, more engineers, more STEM type disciplines, but those are still some of the same staples that drive the organization. But we've definitely had to expand what we need, because the fact is, this profession is rapidly changing. The Attorney General just established the President's, based on an executive order from the President, the Attorney General Barr just established the President's Law Enforcement Commission, and he asked me to be a commissioner and I've been asked to lead the technology group. I will tell you right now, I'm not an early adopter of technology, so it'll be a bit of a lift for me. But what I do know very well is the barriers that technology has created for this profession. And that's where I'd like to move into a couple issues that I do think are worthy of discussion, one of which is data. This is one of the greatest challenges that we see coming. And with the advent of 5G, they say, some of the studies I've been reading and briefed on, that by 2025, the volume of data could jump up to 10% more than it is today. Not 10%, 10 times greater than it is today. That seems like a big leap, but if that's true, I don't know how we're going to manage that unless we try to get ahead of that with advanced data analytics. So I will tell you, for the last few years, I've been hearing about the advanced data analytics, and I heard it on a regular basis. And it almost seemed to me like a broad sweeping term. So we tasked our folks, because when you ask some folks, what does that mean? What does that mean for the agent on the street or the intelligence analyst on the street? What does that mean as they're trying to do what they do? The answers weren't always clear. So we have created an interagency working group to try to drive what is the solution. It's going to be expensive, and we need to give the Hill forewarning that we're going to need this. As we produce discovery to the U.S. Attorney's offices as we're preparing for adjudication, they're waiting saying, here, where's the discovery? And we're saying, hey, we got 10 terabytes of data to go through, or whatever the amount is. It's staggering how much data there is. And in the federal court game, it can be very dangerous if you miss discovery. So we have to get this right. And then when you talk about the volume of intelligence that comes in that could prevent the next homeland attack, or could identify the next transnational criminal group that is pillaging this country of whatever, or an even nation-state actor, we've got to get that right. So we are working towards a solution, but we've got a long way to go. But that is something where we need sharp young minds to come in. I need to make sure, number one, we're hiring the right data scientists, data analysts. Number two, we're using them properly, and we're still working through that. And number three, that as we build this machine, we always think about how does this translate to assisting the agent or the intelligence analyst on the street, in the field. But sometimes we can think too broad and forget the practicality of it. That practicality is really important. So that's one. The next one I want to touch on real quick is encryption. And I recognize this is it gets people's blood boiling when you start talking about encryption. I think this is an important thing for us to talk about as a society. end-to-end encryption where there is no access with a lawful court order. So what do I mean by this? Let's go back to a number of events, whether it's the San Bernardino attack, whether it's the attack that just occurred in Pensacola where you have a Saudi national who is on a U.S. military installation, walks into a building and kills U.S. service members and maims others. And we can't get into at least one of those devices. That's a problem. That's a problem. And, or whether, let's think about this, let's bring it down from a terrorist attack to a crimes against children pedophile. It's not that often that a pedophile is just dealing with one child that he is molesting. It's very often that he is connecting with multiple children. So if we go into a house, we go to arrest a pedophile, we say, what's your code to get into the device? And he says, go pound sand. Many devices we can get into. Some devices we can build a tool to maybe get into that particular platform. Other devices we still cannot get into. That's a dangerous thing, especially if it's your child. We have to think about the victims and we have to think about the future. What does this mean? Now I recognize as I'm saying this, I look through one set of lenses. There's also the privacy aspect, which is incredibly important. And make no mistake, the U.S. government and the Attorney General and the Director have both taken this on publicly. We do back and support strong encryption. But think about it, you can come in any one of our houses with a lawful court order. But you cannot always get into any one of our devices with a lawful court order. Now what's wrong with that picture? Our devices hold more and more of our very personal information. And that's just the device side. There's a whole nother side of this, which is all the encrypted apps that criminals are using on a regular basis. I was just talking to your police officers today. I was briefed recently in a city by a group of our agents who were saying we have a major cartel group that's distributing drugs throughout this pretty good sized city, and they're using encrypted apps. We can't monitor with a lawful court order. I can't stress that enough. We cannot monitor them. It's a problem. The problem is called going dark. We believe the solution will be lawful access. Some will tell you it can't be done. I will tell you some of the best cryptologists in the U.S. government will tell you there is a solution. So I'm going to leave that there. That's a very delicate topic, and not everybody wants to hear about it, but it's something we have to wrestle with as a society for the future of this country, in my estimation. With that, I'm going to say thank you to you, and I'm going to invite Frank back up.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you for shedding light on just the breadth and the depth and the scale and the scope of the mission the Bureau is dealing with today. I mean, it is staggering, and it's coming faster, and it's coming, and our adversaries are getting smarter. So really think it's important to recognize what some of those needs and capabilities are. And since you ended with it, I will start with it, the so-called going dark phenomena. And I'm a big Mark Twain fan. And he may have said, although some claim he never actually said it, but it's one of my favorite quotes, so I'll still use it. History may not repeat itself, but it tends to rhyme. And you were overseeing the investigation in San Bernardino, and then boom, you go to Pensacola, and you're going through the exact same set of issues. And I recognize that it's a contentious set of issues, but at the end of the day, the FBI has become an intelligence-led organization. The biggest priority is to get their left of boom, whether it's a terrorist incident, whether it's a foreign counterintelligence incident, whether it's an organized crime incident. How do you think this will play out going forward? Because the Bureau is also going on in a major direction working with the private sector. Because when you look at cybersecurity issues, quite honestly, the private sector is in the front lines of this war. So how do we square that circle? How do you think this plays out going forward?
Yeah, I'd love to say I have the answer. I don't. What I do know is...
But why is it so important to the FBI?
It's so important because in the FBI, our job is, number one, to prevent crimes from happening and terrorist attacks, those things, people stealing, whatever they're stealing, whether it's, but to do so, we need to understand what's going on between the players, the co-conspirators, so to speak. Sometimes we do not have that ability currently because there are end-to-end encrypted apps out there that just don't allow us. As far as how it plays out, and I am not Pollyanna on this issue is a challenging, complex issue because I recognize I always try to step out of my own shoes and look at how is this company seeing it, how is the public seeing this, how is the international community seeing this. And what I will tell you is our international community partners have these same problems. We deal with what's called the Five Eyes, the UK, the Aussies, the Brits, or the Canadians, the Kiwis down in New Zealand, and us. We are incredibly tight in how we approach transnational and national security issues. We talk to them all the time. They are having some of the same challenges. Quite frankly, the UK and the Aussies are ahead of us on this issue. The Aussies is tied up in litigation at this point, but they're ahead of us because they've actually tried to put forth some things to help this problem, some legislation. We have not. And we have a long way to go. And I just don't see the current, whatever the solution is, the current position is not sustainable for the health and the safety of this country, in my estimation, based on what I've seen. And there's a lot of history of what I've seen here. Now, I will fully admit, in the San Bernardino investigation, I walked into that room, I saw what I saw, it was horrific. So I was emotional in that. But it took the emotion out of that, because the fact is I had a responsibility to lead that investigation to ensure that we turned over every stone. And with that individual, the male shooter, I won't name him, we could not get into his device. And to us, that's a potential piece of evidence. That's why that went the way it went. Currently, we're still working through some of the Pensacola issues. I don't want to get too much into that. But those are just terrorism cases. We've got to think about all the crimes against children that affect families throughout this country. It rips a swath through some of these families. It's horrific. And these are the future, these kids are the future of our country. And we've got to do everything we can to protect them. That's just one crime. There's a whole series of crimes. I talked to you about drug trafficking organizations. I talked to you about transnational criminal organized groups. The solution is challenging. And the commerce folks will say the companies will voice their concerns on commerce. If we do it here, you can have other companies throughout the world that don't do it. I would submit to you, we have a responsibility to protect our citizens. So where does this end up? I don't know. It's incredibly complex. There's a lot to it. I look through my set of lenses, but I think it is something we have got to wrestle with, because right now we're behind. I feel like we're kicking the can down the road.
Awesome. And the FBI went through a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to retool it post 9/11, to genuinely get to that intelligence-led kind of approach. Now you're starting to see a swing back to nation-state actors, whether it's from a foreign counterintelligence perspective or from a cyber perspective. How is the Bureau, and these aren't either-or propositions. The bad guy has a vote, and they're active all the time, whether it's from a non-state actor, whether it's from a terrorist organization, domestic or FTO, or whether it's a state actor. How do you feel that is calibrating itself inside the Bureau?
It's a constant balance. We have to grow our counterintelligence program. So in the
Some
FBI,
on campuses too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Big issue.
Absolutely. The academic outreach program that we are expanding into has been very important. Academic research, I don't know all the ins and outs, and I don't want to get over my skis on this, but what I do know is there's very much of a sharing environment. We see this throughout the country. That's a positive thing in research. All we're trying to do is educate the administration of the university so that they know the threats that are probably on their campus today and the pressures that those non-traditional collectors are under from their government to steal. So that's really important. So we've expanded that academic outreach, and quite frankly, I didn't know how it would be received. We've actually received quite very hungry for information from most of the universities. I'm sure there's some that are not, but most of them seem very open to learning more about it and having the discussion, and where possible, putting things into place to protect their sensitive research and technology. As far as the inside the organization, there's 4 standalone operational divisions: counterintelligence, counterterrorism, criminal, CID, which is everything from what I talked about earlier, gangs to public health or healthcare fraud and everything in between. And then you have our cyber division. What we recognize is we have to tie the cyber and the counterintelligence divisions together constantly, because when I first arrived in Washington, I would get these briefings on a very sensitive counterintelligence case, but cyber was the medium of doing what they were doing. And sometimes I'd look at the counterintelligence head and I'd say, "Are you talking to you?" And you'd get this, "Yeah." And you knew they were going to have a conversation after the meeting. That would happen. Today, they are so well lashed up, and we have to grow both of those programs. At the same time, we cannot pull away from our number one priority, which is protecting the homeland from attack. That is an ever-present threat that we have to be vigilant on each and every day. And the criminal threats that are always going to be there that we need to work with our counterparts on.
So if we were to sort of rack and stack the cyber threat, nation-state actors and their proxies, because it is difficult to discern at the time of a breach who's behind the clickety-clack of the keyboard, and why that lash-up is so important between CI and cyber. So you've got state actors, you've got non-state actors, whether criminal or whether terrorist in nature or extremists of any sort. And the time and the commitment and the capability that you're looking for going forward. And I'm going to make sure we bring our students into some of this discussion after you and I have our quick chat. That's going to be critical to the Bureau going forward, is literally having, and also intelligence analysis.
Yes.
Is that not so? In addition to the special agents, the Bureau has a big need to enhance its analytic capability and intelligence specialists. Where do you see that going?
I see that only expanding. And look, the organization started under a foundation of we were broken off of, not broken off, but we were a piece of the Attorney General back in the early 1900s, where he said, "I need an investigative force." That's how it started. It was agents working investigations. It has since, as I mentioned earlier, morphed post 9/11 into a very healthy intelligence analyst cadre, and these folks are sharp. I mean, I get briefed by them all the time, and I am so impressed with so many of them. And their job is to help connect the dots, regardless of what the threats are. Today, when we train the FBI agents at Quantico, we trade them for half the time while they're at the academy. Guess who they sit with? The intelligence analysts. That was something we began about 3-4 years ago, and we didn't know how it would work. It's working incredibly well. So for the first, I believe it's 10 weeks, they're together, and then they break off and they learn their own individual disciplines. So they understand each other, how they think, they understand each other's way of doing things, and understand the overall mission rather, but you also break down these cultural internal barriers, which in organizational behavior 101 happens in every bureaucracy. So we want them to understand each other, but they have to work together. When I take a briefing, which is seemingly all day, every day, in meetings, they'll bring in a team. I just had one yesterday, I believe it was, from our international ops division, which we're expanding some things overseas, particularly our cyber presence overseas. And we're trying to make sure that we are strategically thinking about where to place our resources, what development, relationships we need to build. We're working hand in hand with the CIA on it. Overseas, we have to coordinate everything through the CIA, and rightly so. Here, it's just the opposite. But we have to work as part of that country team. But the folks that came in and briefed me, it was a team from leadership of the division down to an intelligence analyst who really did most of the briefing, and she was incredibly sharp, and I walked out of there just with a smile on my face, because this thing had stumbled a little bit, this whole initiative, and I walked out of there and thought, we got the right people on this, and she was incredibly bright. But the point is, we've got the right people. We need to continue to build that analyst cadre.
And these are special agents that have technical skills and those that are technically oriented that can appreciate the real priorities for someone in the field, right? It's sort of where the agency was in the post 9/11. You had to get the
Yes.
analyst embedded in the field and vice versa.
Yes, yeah. You know, when you say they're special agents, I want to make sure I understand it. We are seeking STEM grads, but I also don't want to give folks the impression that they all have to be STEM folks, whether
Yeah.
it's special agents or whether it's intelligence analysts.
Exactly.
We need all disciplines, but we are just because of the rapidly advancing threats, we need more STEM skills than we ever have.
So 2020 started out with a bit of a bang, and I don't think anyone's shedding any tears that Soleimani lost his life, head of the IRGC in Iran. What are the potential implications from a blowback perspective, if any? Where does the Bureau see this? How are you prioritizing some of the considerations and concerns there?
It's a good question, and let me set that up. So the first thing I'll do is, back in the summer, we had some pretty good saber rattling between us and Iran, the U.S. and Iran. Every time that happens, our number one focus is harden this country, provide resilience for this country. So I asked the analysts to put together a book on all the intel products we have that are relevant, because there's probably hundreds of them, but that are relevant to helping us understand the picture of the threat against the homeland. They did so. They gave me a binder, I poured through it, and that's everything from a proxy, which is a very capable proxy, which is Hezbollah, which does have the capacity to attack and has proven that capacity to attack throughout the world, to the IRGC and the MOIS and their involvement. They did that. Things settled down when Soleimani was killed. I asked them for that product to be updated. They quickly updated and they provided it to us. And then what we do as an organization is we look out to where our terrorism cases and our counter-intel cases that merge with those that involve Iran in this country. And we began to make sure everybody is extremely well coordinated. Now you say, well, you should be doing that every day. We do, but we make sure that everybody knows, hey, this guy in name your city, I'm real concerned with the activities for what I'm seeing from him and his travel patterns and whatever, 24/7 surveillance. So that we know we're providing that resilience to this country to help ensure that we do not get attacked. Now overseas, there are also great concerns. I think Iran knows that if they hit the U.S., there will be significant
Serious
consequences. That's a red line. Everybody knows it. However, we also have interests throughout the world, and I think there's some red lines there. And that's not for me to decide. That's for the president to decide. But we are also very concerned with Americans overseas, companies overseas. So it is just something that we consistently watch, and we make sure that we are working. And I'm not just talking about the FBI, the U.S. intelligence community in tandem with our partners. And that's everything from the Five Eyes, but well beyond that throughout the world, to ensure that we are providing and trying to accumulate all the threat information we can, to have those analysts put together and connect all those dots, to working with our Department of Defense, which is absolutely incredible in this country. We're so fortunate to have them and all the resources that they have to ensure that Americans are protected, whether it's overseas or whether it's in the U.S.
And anything on the cyber side? Because they've demonstrated their willingness to use cyber as a means to achieve their objectives.
Yes.
Massive distributed denial of service attacks on U.S. financial banks and financial services, and anything that we should be thinking about there?
Yeah, so immediately we began to reach out to the private sector. The banking sector is one we're always concerned with, that they are fully up on the latest threats. And we make sure that we are well coordinating with the banking sector immediately. The energy sector is another one we're very concerned with, because there are certain sectors in this country that can stop traffic very quickly. And those two are incredibly important. There's many.
Bright lights on.
Yeah, exactly. We could be sitting here in the dark. So those are the type of things that we will immediately do. And it's essentially an effort to build a shell around the country and harden it. And provide resilience. Now, that said, Iran has proven in the past a very deliberate patience. So just because nothing hasn't happened in the last month, month and a half, or the last month, doesn't mean we take our foot off the gas, because that is something we have to be mindful of, that they are thoughtful, they are deliberate, they are patient, and they have proven it time and time again throughout the world.
And they have a vote on the timing. So
Yes, they do.
I'm glad you brought that up. I want to make sure, because I can go on all day, but I want to make sure we have an opportunity for some of our faculty and students to ask questions. So I'm going to turn it over to the audience now. If you have a question, please raise your hand and identify yourself.
We can only see so far for
Yeah,
the ones in the back.
it is hard to see. We've got a question here. And Mike is coming. It is hard. It's bright.
Thank you. Daniel Torrance, Chief Cyber AI Strategist for the Auburn Cyber Research Center. Thanks for coming here and
Thank you.
sharing with us. Besides graduating great students for you to hire, what are kind of the top research challenges in cyber and other national security arenas that you would like to see Auburn address?
Well, I like what you're doing right now. AI is the great race right now internationally, and I did read very little, but I saw a little in a couple blurbs as I was preparing to come down here about some of the AI research going on. That's incredibly important. Cryptology, always going to be a major discipline, but we are looking to use AI more and more in this country, and it's coming. And it can either swallow us, or we can try to get ahead of it or stay with it. And it can make things much easier. It can also make things more challenging. That's just the world we're in today, for our business at least. That's a good question. The other one I would say would be, like this encryption thing, I'm going to get off that because I can stay on that too long. I think AI is really the one that we're focused on the most. Now, 5G is going to present some incredible issues for us to deal with. It's going to be fantastic in so many ways for the country, but we know it's presenting issues for us. There's a lot out there on Huawei, and I don't want to get too much into that as well. But that's something that internationally we are very focused on, which countries are adopting it for good reason. And then there's 6G. They briefed me the other day on 6G, and I was asking them, all right, what does that mean? When is that going to come? And I've had one briefing on it, so I have a long way to go to learn more about that. But I think the more we can get ahead of that, the better, because part of the issue with the 5G issue is there's a concern about, well, the cost to rip and replace of the underlying foundation, as well as the alternatives. So this is something that we know in the 6G, we've now got some time, because you're going into probably the 2030s for that, so we should be thinking beyond the next problem. And I think that's what we stressed for our leaders in this world today is we got a lot of caretaker leaders out there that can handle what's going on today. We need to be looking around the corner and over the horizon as to what's next. And so I think AI, I'm very interested to hear more about your AI research. I think that's so important for the future of this country.
Unfortunately, you will be hearing from Daniel later, but let me just do a foot stomp on the 5G issue, because I think this gets lost in some of the deliberations and thinking and planning. I mean, ultimately, it would be like building our principal foundations on quicksand. Because whoever wins the 5G race, everything else will, to one extent or another, be dependent upon it. It's like the spoke in the wheel in terms of where things are going. And I think we take for granted that we win that race. This is not a race that's guaranteed.
I agree.
So I just urge our, not only our researchers, but also those in the political environment and our investors to recognize this is a race we can't lose.
We agree.
In the long run, it could have huge debilitating effects, not only on our national security, but on our way of life as well. Because the countries we'd be losing to don't necessarily view democratic norms and principles the way we do. Do we have time? We have time for a couple more questions. Hopefully a student. Let's get a student out here. Please. And please wait for the mic. It's coming. And it is hard to see. So.
I'll stand up. All right. So I'm Spencer Kwok. I'm a senior in computer science here. And my question for you is, in your career as an FBI agent, from when you were applying to now, what would you say is the biggest personal challenge you've had to face in that career, and what was the most important part of overcoming that challenge for you?
That's a great question. Look, I was very pleased that I was fortunate enough to be selected to be an FBI agent. It was an honor for me, and then I looked at it then like I look at it today. Every morning I get up and I tell myself, I don't talk to myself physically, but I tell myself in my mind, don't screw this up. You got a lot of people counting on you, and recognize that it's a privilege that's been bestowed upon you, and you have a lot of responsibility, and the public has a certain expectation that they should be able to. You should be able to meet that. I'll start with that. As far as the most challenging part for me, look, to ascend in an organization that is a national and even an international organization, as you ascend, you have to move a lot. That's a challenge on a family, can be a challenge on a family. I've been very fortunate. I have a wife who is very pliable, and she's been very supportive. We made a deal early on. When you're not at work, I want you home, and that's a fair deal. But there's a lot of nights I'm going home 9:30, and that's just the way it is. These are hard jobs. And it was similar as a case agent, believe it or not, depending on what violation you're working, because the criminals don't keep an 8-to-5 schedule. Unless you're working healthcare fraud, a little more so, or white-collar fraud, but the hours are long, the pressures are there, your word is your bond. And if you are, the FBI, people, I laugh when I hear people say the government never fires anyone. We fire people often, and it's usually because of a lack of candor. Now, we don't have a lot of people running around lacking candor. We have very few. But that is a red line for the organization. So your word, your behavior, your judgment, the optics of how you behave are so important. And everyone watches. I've been in many different venues where you have mixed crowds, or regardless of whether it's occupational or actually geographic. And I am always cognizant that we are who we are. We have the ability to believe what we want to believe, but once you put on the FBI insignia, whether it's a badge, if you're an agent or whatever, if you're not, you have a responsibility to seek the facts, stay out of the politics, and do your job. And that can at times be a challenge, because people will try to pull you both ways, and that's something we can't have. The personal challenges, look, I'll bring it down a little bit from there. I've seen some bad things, and that's something that you have to compartmentalize and just move on. I've been very good at that. Not everybody has that ability. Some people, it'll stick with them. So one thing that we are focused on in the Attorney General's law enforcement, or the President's Law Enforcement Commission, and also just internally in the FBI and throughout the profession, is the resilience and the mental health of our workforce, because they see bad things sometimes, and that it can weigh on them. And you have this thing called life going on, where you have financial issues, deaths in your family, sometimes divorces, all kinds of things that happen with life. That taxes people as it is. Then you add on this second layer of what people will see on a relatively routine basis. And I'm talking the state and local see more than anyone. They see some unbelievably difficult things on the street, but we see quite a bit, especially when you talk about these mass casualty events. I'm worried about the workforce. I didn't have a problem with it, but I'm mindful of it, because we have had many folks that have had problems with it, not just in the FBI, but throughout the profession. So that's something that we are trying to bring more resilience into our workforce, and how they approach, whether they need counseling, whatever it is. For many, many years, we didn't require our folks, when they got in a shooting, to seek or to go see a psychologist. Many of your state and local departments have been doing that for years. The fact is, they have more than we do, but we have our share. And that can be a very traumatic incident that can come back years later. The weekend of El Paso and Dayton, when those two things occurred, we had multiple evidence response teams running that investigation in El Paso, working with the El Paso Police Department. But our evidence response teams did all this crime scene, and it was incredible what they saw. And I was just down there not long ago. That doesn't just go away. I had a conversation with a couple of them, and I could tell they were still greatly impacted by it. So it's something you just have to be mindful of. Your fitness, your health, your family, your relationships, those are all really, really important grounding factors to make sure that you can move through that.
David, I'm so glad you brought up the mental health, because it's taken a while for our armed services and others to recognize some of the, and if you think about it, if you're spending your time looking at bad actors doing bad things, that's an issue. Child predator, if you're dealing with that every day, I'm glad you've recognized that issue, because I'm sure it could be latent, it can pop many years later. So, but your job is to keep those things from happening. So thank you for that. And I'd be curious to build on that in a different kind of way. What was it like going from the ops guy? And I think that gave you a lot of credibility to be able to speak to the field offices, going to headquarters. And Tom asked me to say, no good deed goes unpunished.
He's right.
He said to underscore that when he kind of sucked you into that environment. But what was it like going from an operational role to, and in addition to being the deputy director, you were the associate deputy director. So in essence is the COO as
Right.
well. You've seen it from so many perspectives. What was that like?
It was a challenge for me. When I was I was running our Los Angeles field office, and we had some.
It's the coolest field office.
It was a great field office. I enjoyed it.
The top.
The traffic is horrific, but the field office itself and the people and the partnerships we had out there, I loved it. And the work was just phenomenal. And we had work throughout Southeast Asia where we'd send teams over there and do all sorts of things. But when I was called at the time to come back and be the associate deputy director, that's the number 3 position. You essentially handle internal investigations, and you handle everything from budget to infrastructure to IT, and that was out of my skill set. Now, some folks would say it can be a potential grooming position depending on how you do for the deputy director position.
Or a weeding out position.
Or weeding out, true. So it was hard for me, I'll be quite frank, because especially after this was on the heels of the San Bernardino incident in Los Angeles. I was very tied to that community and very tied to my office, and I was worried about this mental health issue because our folks saw some really bad things. It was nasty. And I was worried about them. I was worried about making sure that we protected everything. And then I get this call out of the blue to come back. And I thought, well, I don't want to do that. And I had planned on retiring out there. And I told my wife, I said, I'm not feeling good about this. And my father-in-law sent me about a 1.5-page email that said, you're crazy if you don't take this. And he went on and on. And so I read that, and ultimately I made the decision. To get to your point, it was a challenge for me because I didn't have a heavy IT background. But what I have actually gotten pretty good at is recognizing good talent and being able to bring them in to the right positions. And in an organization, you need some specialized skills. The internal investigation, I was good with that. I knew all that stuff. But the IT side really kind of confounded me at times. But we were able to begin to recruit the right people and hire the right people and move one or two along so that we could build the right IT infrastructure. We still have a long way to go. We're the government. We are never going to be at the top of the heap as much as I'd love to because it's very, very expensive. But we are far more advanced, not because of me, not at all, but because of good people and good vision and good selection of technology. We're far better than we used to be. But it was a challenge for me because I love the ops side, but I also recognize you have the ability when you ascend in an organization, you have the ability to move that organization. What's sometimes frustrating in a large bureaucracy is you can have some great ideas, but it's hard to get them up through that ceiling to break through and get someone to say, do it. And so now I'm in those positions where I can actually do that. Now you have to be careful with that and make sure you're not getting convinced to go the wrong way. But that's where you pick the right people, and then you pick a balanced approach. You look for the dissenting voices sometimes, because those are important too. And then you make a decision and move. And so it was a hard thing to transition, to your point, but it was also a very gratifying experience for me, because I learned so much about the budget that I didn't know, some of the infrastructure issues. I'll tell you, one of the most rewarding experiences I had in that job was when San Juan got hit by the hurricanes. The FBI has a plane, a big plane. We have a number of planes, but we flew out there right after the hurricane. They got hit twice, Maria and Irma, two nasty women. They hit them hard. And they hit, we have a big office in San Juan, and it's a very busy office. There's a lot of corruption, a lot of violent crime, plenty of activity out there. We also have what's called an RA, a resident agency, in St. Croix and St. Thomas. So you think, oh, that sounds pretty rough. Well, believe it. These folks work hard, but we went out there, we took a bunch of generators, we focused on our folks, and I'm telling you, they got hit hard. And then, so we were in San Juan, and it was amazing to see. It was a leadership lesson 101, because what I saw was some of our informal leaders became leaders because they stepped up and started making decisions and do things. Most of our leadership team did really well. There was an exception here and there. But then after being in San Juan and seeing all the things they did, I was so gratified to see how they were doing and how resilient they were. Now, we had our hostage rescue team fly over and essentially participate in humanitarian missions, which that's not their role. They flew over in these helos, island to island, and got there, and they were literally taking massive swaths of food and water and flying them up into these remote mountain villages, and they had videos of the people just swamping them because they were so thirsty and hungry. It was bad. But then we flew to St. Thomas and St. Croix. And this is where I really realized the power of what we could do and the position and how important it is, was when I stood there in St. Croix. We had about an hour with these three guys who were in the RA, and they were very mature, not in years, but just in the way they thought through things. We stood in essentially a bombed out building that was destroyed by the hurricane. It felt like it was 140 degrees. I was sweating through my clothes, but we just talked about how you doing. All three of them had sustained pretty significant damage to their houses. All the bureau cars had been completely flooded. They were a mess. And none of them had electricity, nor did the FBI office at the time. It was that bad. And they said, look, the last time this happened, we didn't have electricity for 15 months. Wow. And I stood and talked to them for a while, and you know what? You know what, as I walked away from that, you know what I didn't hear? Not one complaint. Now, I got plenty of complaints from others, but not from those three. And I was just so impressed, and I walked away so gratified. But the other thing, and then I know I'm going to end this response. What I learned from that job was the importance of the supporting cast to the mission, that mission I talked to you about, the widgets and the investigations. Sometimes when you're in that mission, you're the pointy edge of the spear and you think, yeah, that other stuff supports it. What I learned was how important that is and how dedicated and devoted those folks were. So for me, it was an incredible experience to mature in the way I saw the organization and the way that I understood the organization and the way I appreciated parts of the organization.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, at the end of the day, it is always about the people. Mm-hmm. Technology can enable operations. Technology can bring about new risk. But ultimately, it is about the women and men and from an adversarial standpoint, there is still someone behind that clickety-clack of the keyboard until we go all adversarial AI, right, which may come one day, but it's not here yet. But it is about the women and men of the organization, and I think that's where the technology, you were talking about some of the IT, to know to invest, to innovate, and to actually build capabilities that enable the mission it's not about the technology in itself, but it is about the ability to recognize where the greatest needs are. So good on you for recognizing that. We can have maybe one very, very, very quick question. Please, right up front here, quick. Oh, gentleman in second row is who I saw, but I'm fine one way or another. Sorry. I'm sorry.
Deputy Director, my name is Maurice Cyrus. You spoke upon magnitude of being a professional within within this organization. However, and you've also talked about the growth of the organization. But my question to you, and I know probably a lot of other college students is, I know my wife, she studies clinical mental health here at the university, and she's possibly thinking about joining the organization as well. But what is the Bureau doing to incentivize recruiting college students, STEM students, and just other good people to join the ranks of this organization when the civilian sector or the private sector, there's so much more room for opportunity. And I know coming through the pipeline, a lot of professionals, when you guys do recruit them, actually have to relinquish a lot of financial perks that they may have, or any type of incentives that they already have. Is the Bureau going to ramp that up? Is that something that you guys are looking at doing? And how do you look to keep up with the private sector and also take care of the men and women that are holding such a responsible occupation?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a challenge that we have and we will have for many years to come. Number one, the economy today is booming, and there's a lot of jobs out there, and so we're competing not just with other government agencies at times, but certainly with the private sector. The reality is we cannot provide the level of incentives or even close to the level of incentives financially that the private sector can provide. We recognize that. We have changed. I'm going to give you a multiple part quickly. We've changed the way we recruit. When I was in Los Angeles, I realized as I went to a recruiting event, I had folks handing out flyers. Well, that's great, and I'm not saying that's all we have. That's not how this age group consumes information. That's old school, and I get that. There's still a need for it here and there, but we had to change how we attract, how we get them to at least take a look at us. I would tell you this, we try to provide financial incentives when we can, but at the end of the day, there's only so much taxpayer money, and it's coming out of all our pockets. What we have is an opportunity, and we try to drive that into people, is we have an opportunity to serve the public and to serve the country. And if the college students out there hear nothing else, I would say this: serve your country in some form or fashion. And it doesn't have to be with us, but this is a great country we're in. Serve it, at least through part of your adult life, please, because it will provide you more gratification than that big check will. I promise you. It won't relieve tension like that big check will, or pressure, but I promise you, at the end of the day, you will go home feeling good about what you just did or about what you are doing. And that's something that money cannot buy. So I can never bridge that gap between the government and private sector. We are doing the best we can to provide incentives when possible, financial incentives, especially when we're moving people. We do provide them more than we used to be able to, but it's not an issue we can ever solve with just money. So it's trying to attract them to the mission. I will tell you, in the cyber realm, it can be a little more challenging, because you bring in some really extraordinary talent. They want the best of the best technology, and they want the ability to go after the adversary immediately without, wild abandon. And there's a lot of things that can hold them back. And so sometimes you got to tell them, whoa, hang in
Little
there
hitting
with
back's
us.
okay, though,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Oh,
Done
we're hitting
right.
back. We're hitting back quite often now. But that's a challenge, because they are used to, if they come from certain companies, very high-level technology and the best of the best. And we have to remember, we're funded through your dollars.
David, I couldn't think of a better and more powerful way to end the conversation. But before I let everyone go, hopefully a good bridge. We're trying to translate some of the nouns into verbs. So instead of just talking about the issues, working with the Bureau to actually address some of the priorities you're all facing. And I want to bring up President Gouge again to be able to sign an MOU to show that we are trying to bring our smartest students to support the Bureau on its mission. So before we let you go and we say thank you, why don't we make this real?
Thank you. Anytime two parties agree to work together, the most important ingredient is trust. And certainly on our behalf, we have great trust in you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Gouge, thank you as well, and we feel the same way, and we feel this is a tremendous opportunity for both of our institutions to better serve this country. There's that one.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My pleasure. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for your service, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.